One of my favorite questions is, so what? And if you are like me, with a extreme pragmatist orientation, you might be asking that question right now. So what? So what do we do with this? How do we teach this? We're educators at Colorado Christian University. How do we teach this? What do we do with this? So what I'm going to share with us over the next few minutes are some suggestions or some ways that we could consider teaching these concepts of a biblical view of human nature and of limited government to our students. And they apply in all areas. They apply whether you work maybe in student development like I do, or maybe you're in the classroom, or maybe you work in a business office or in a behind-the-scenes place. There are many ways that we can apply this. There's many ways we can move the projector as well, I think. There we go. Sorry about that. It is clear through the presentations that we've seen already that the antidote to big government is the notion of personal responsibility. In essence, limited government only works well when its constituents act as moral agents and demonstrate personal responsibility and competence. Consequently here, I'll present, like I said, some pedagogical tactics that may be utilized to teach students to become more mature individuals with a moral conscience and compass based within a sampling of student development and learning philosophy. So real simply here, one of the major theories that we look at it in lots of ways was done by a guy named Art Chickering. And then he's worked with a woman named Linda Reiser. Those of us in student development are all laughing. This is probably the most talked about and used theory ever in terms of college student development. And so in Erik Erikson's identity formation of psychology, the college age years are kind of broken down into several different tasks that students are trying to achieve when they come to college. And so you see here developing competence, managing conflict, managing emotions effectively, moving through autonomy towards interdependence, establishing identity, who am I, establishing freeing interpersonal relationships, and then lastly, developing purpose and integrity. Chickering and Reiser suggested many years ago that this is what college students are really trying to do. And we track these things through the educational experience. So freshmen and sophomores are typically dealing with things like developing competence. Hey, do I have enough clothes to go to class today? Have I eaten a decent meal? Can I get along with my roommates? Those kind of things. Until we moved to the junior and senior year where we were more talking about, well, who am I and what am I here for? And how am I going to live my life with some semblance of integrity? And so as we look at this, the three things that I would really draw our attention to are the notions of establishing identity, developing purpose, and developing integrity. I think we could all agree that that's what we're really hoping that we could accomplish here, that students would be able to walk out of CCU saying, I know who I am, and who that is, I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. And then to build upon that, this notion of developing a purpose and integrity. Sean Groves was here in chapel several weeks ago, and Sean's a national recording artist. He talked about that most of us in the church we've learned a lot what we've been saved from. We've heard a lot about that. We've been saved from all of these things, but we rarely talk about what have we been saved for. And so Sean Groves really challenged our students to say, what have you been saved for, and what has God called you to in this world? And that's really this notion of developing purpose. What am I here to do? Where am I going to go with this thing? And then lastly, how do I live my life in such a way that has integrity, and all of these things fit together? And so to do this, there are several suggestions, several different educational processes that we can use to encourage growth. Simple things like engaging students in making choices, requiring interaction with diverse thoughts and ideas, involving students in direct and varied experiences, giving students opportunities to solve complex problems, and involving students in receiving feedback and making objective self-assessment. You'll see there that we also use this quite a bit in student development as we talk about spiritual formation, which is one of our major outputs here at some level as a university. As you see how we tie in the student development theory through what we're doing along with Fowler's faith development stages and spiritual disciplines, and really trying to create a map for what does student development look like. And so these are things that we are constantly doing all the time, trying to help students move along in their developmental process. In terms of moral development, many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with Larry Kohlberg's work at Harvard that he's done in terms of moral development and moving students from making moral decisions based on natural consequence and kind of this notion of right and wrong that society sets up for us to really value judgments. And so they suggest that Many researchers who have looked at moral development over the years suggest that we can foster moral development through an exchange of ideas, exposing students to multiple perspectives on and discussions of social and moral issues, academic values of seeking truth and reasoning carefully, which we do here at CCU, institutional values of responsibility and integrity, providing role-playing opportunities to students, and ultimately a democratic environment. And then lastly, in terms of learning style research, that might be a little bit hard to see, and those of you who are in the education department, I hope I get this somewhat right. So, but there, basically, David Kolb and some of his colleagues have suggested that people learn by experiencing, by reflecting, by thinking, and by doing. And typically, all of those experiences are in the learning cycle, if you will. But ultimately, he suggests that when one uses both the concrete and abstract modes to take in experiences, and then we both reflect on and act upon that knowledge or that experience, we are really able to learn the most. So based on that, I just want to share a few pedagogical tactics that we can use to help teach our students a biblical view of human nature and limited government. Number one, we can talk about these things. We can set up curricular opportunities for students to talk about this. We can talk about the role of the individual and government and the church throughout history, like Dr. Mallinson has talked about today. We can give students opportunities to actually serve, to engage in places where they are not just learning and thinking through, but they're actually doing something with the knowledge that they're taking in by incorporating service learning in our courses and all of our offerings here at the university. We can chat with folks in biblical studies about human nature, and then we can talk about government and social issues. I think it was a little bit too fast there. Secondly, we can encourage personal responsibility in our students. Like I said before, the antidote to big government is personal responsibility. And so there we can encourage personal responsibility through our behavioral policies, standards, and protocols. Some of you have been around here long enough to know CCU a little bit in the pre-Jim McCormick years. And if you know Jim and some of the change he made here, one of the first changes that Jim made when he got to CCU was he repealed a curfew. We basically had a curfew that RAs would go around every evening. I think it was at midnight, and they'd make sure that everybody was in bed, and they were all set there. And when Jim came to CCU out of a strong student development theory background there, Jim said, I don't think that's really helping our students to learn to make good choices and to be responsible citizens. And so he changed that and many other things. And I think that we start to see here what we've seen in student development, at least, is kind of a loosening of some of our rules and some of the things we're telling students they have to do all of the time. But by doing that, offering students the ability to make good choices and to move in a direction that really is responsible and is what the Lord would want for them. And I think that Dr. Mallinson was a student here in the early 1990s and says that our culture here is dramatically different. Our rule book maybe says that we are not as strict, but our students love the Lord and are really figuring out what it looks like to live in a way that honors Him. We can empower students through leadership and staff positions on campus. We can offer students voice when it's appropriate in decision-making processes on campus. We can offer curricular assignments, different projects, collaboration experiences, in-class exercises, et cetera, that encourage personal responsibility. And then we can also do that as students engage in relationships while on campus here. Thirdly, we can encourage the development of the private sphere of conscience, that thing in students that says, hey, I know that I'm saved for something, and so I want to care for other folks. We can give students the opportunities to give money, to volunteer their time, and to help others in need. We can reflect upon and challenge the pervasive societal selfishness, greed, and materialism that Dr. Sweeting talked about a couple of weeks ago. We can show students, through our personal example and historical illustrations, alternatives to such lifestyles. And we can speak the truth and love to students, saying the things that need to be said to them to encourage their personal growth and maturity. And fourthly, we can model these principles of limited government and personal responsibility in our personal lives and in our organizational life. One, we can limit our need for our own government, if you will, in the sense by offering balanced power in different areas, by resisting the urge sometimes to make more policy in situations. We've all been in many situations where something goes wrong, and so what do we often do there is we make policy to make sure that something doesn't go wrong. And one of the challenges that happens there is when we make policy and we clean those things up, we remove the learning experiences often from those who go through those things and things kind of go wrong. And so it's a challenge, something that we can do there is to encourage personal responsibility and conflict resolution and collaboration, working together to solve our problems. We can include students in our policy making, and we can handle situations at the lowest level possible. And oftentimes that's even encouraging students to take responsibility in working through their relational and academic challenges without immediate intervention. The challenge here really for us is this notion of teaching students responsibility yet offering a safe and supportive environment. And that's the challenge that we really face as administrators and as faculty at a Christian college is offering that correct balance of challenge and support, but ultimately that we're challenging our students and really asking our students to move in a direction that they become responsible agents so that they can participate well in notions of limited government. So ultimately this is about personal responsibility and care, and how do we think about this. My hope here is that this conversation, what I'm trying to say is not to throw out these are all the things we can do or these are things we should be doing, but instead to just get us to start to think about this even more, and to think about it and to talk about it and to say, how do we educate our students here? The president's made it clear that this is something that we want to be about and to educate our students about. And so how do we do this? And hopefully that we can start talking about this in our faculty communities and our staff communities and our offices and all those different kind of ways. So with that, we will move to a question and answer period. I will come around and collect the last few questions that you might have.